So my name is Sarah McAllister. I am Senior Associate Director here for the Office of Alumni Career and Professional Development, and I'm really excited for today's topic. Before I introduce John, I am going to just do a couple housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Nicole Bush, who is Senior Director for Alumni Career and Professional Development, she is going to be our tech person for this session. So if you have any issues or questions on the tech side, please feel free to DM her directly. John Hyde, who is our presenter, he is going to be leading our discussion today, and there will be time for questions at the end. And John, if you want people to kind of engage throughout, please let them know for that. The other, I feel like there was one more thing that I was going to talk about housekeeping wise, but I cannot remember. So Nicole will put in the chat the YouTube link. I will also follow up with everyone with the recording, as well as information on how to get in touch with John, which I know that he will share at the end as well. So actually, John, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you. I so appreciate your time today. I'll let you introduce yourself and then take us away with today's presentation. And thank you again for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity. This topic came about through conversation with Sarah about career opportunities and what could I bring to the table to help people to think through their career path and their next set of options. I come to this from an entirely different vantage point. I do business deals for a living. And so I come to the topic of career development from the other side, from the perspective of the business owners who are looking for their business to either be sold, or they're looking for expertise to help them with significant changes in their business, which led me to discussing, okay, how can somebody go about accessing opportunities within the privately held and family-owned company marketplace, and to do so from the point of view of building their career at the same time. So that's the genesis of the topic. What will you learn in this? There's really 6 areas that I've identified. Each in itself could be a whole course or curriculum, but for this presentation, obviously, it's just an overview. They range from buying an ownership stake in a business, to lending money to the business, having a partnership where different skills are brought to the table. We'll also cover employment, but not just for a paycheck, for what I call an equity kicker, meaning some skin in the game, some upside potential beyond the employment relationship. We'll talk about strategic tenant relationships, which is another way of saying it's a real estate deal that has also a business component to it. And lastly, probably the most popular answer to the question of how do I become involved with a small business, people say join a franchise system. So it's here for the sake of completeness, although you'll hear I'm not a big fan of it. So these six areas, I'm not saying these are the only 6, but this will cover us for the next 20, 25 minutes or so. And then I'll also get into things to avoid, and then we'll have time for questions. Please feel free to send questions through the chat. And then hopefully Nicole could let me know, or Sarah could let me know what questions are there. So let's go right into it. By way of background, I went to Tulane Law School, class of '86, Colgate University undergrad. I've been a consultant for 30 years, mostly with companies that are in financial trouble. I have expertise in restructuring, bankruptcy, financing, legal expertise that interfaces with financial expertise. And by having both, it's a little bit of a unique niche that I have, and have been able to sustain this practice for a long time. That's the background. So let's start with the first one, buying an ownership stake, because this is the one that people think of. Well, actually, they think of the franchise system as the first choice, but then they say, well, maybe I should just buy a business, doesn't have to be a franchise. So I'm going to take a little bit more time on this particular option. And it's the mirror image of a merger and acquisition. And, this is one of those webinars where I have different levels of expertise in the audience. I realize that. So to get us all on the same page, when I talk about buying a business, mergers and acquisitions, it's all the same for this purpose. What are the three factors for a successful M&A transaction involving a privately held business? Here's my first question to the group. What would be number one? What is the first factor to look at? And I'm interested to see if we can get a few responses to that.
Balance sheet?
Close though. Well, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go right to it. Chemistry. That's right. It's not the financials. It's the chemistry among the individuals by far. The reason in Wall Street deals, it's nothing to do with chemistry. It's all about numbers and legal documents. But in privately held businesses, if you can't get along with the other people, it's not going to work. So right there is the exclusionary factor. I like the business. I don't like the people involved. Forget it. Next, don't even go further. There has to be chemistry means the ability to talk, to solve problems, to share, to voice opinions. None of that goes well if the people don't get along. And the problem with that is it's hard to tell if you're going to get along. And I, as an advisor, I can't help you with that. I can help do your deal, but you got to figure out if you like the other people. That's the challenge. The second most important factor, you have to know something about what you're getting involved in. Line it up with your expertise and your passion. A business that you don't like is not a good one to be involved in. An industry that you have no passion for, forget about it. The passion, the expertise, the chemistry with the people involved, those are the prerequisites. And the final factor is to make the right deal at the right time. If you have all three of these things going, then you're in a great position to be able to buy an ownership interest in a business and become a partner and not just work in the business as an employee. So then the variation of that is private lender investing. Now, what do we mean by private lender investing? That's a fancy way of saying use your money, not just your expertise, to create an opportunity with the business. It's lending the money, not just owning it and not just working in the business. So the lending part of it requires a different mindset. And I love the example of Warren Buffett, the famous investor, who in the time of the financial crisis in 2008, famously invested $8 billion in Goldman Sachs, the investment firm. Now, remember, Goldman Sachs is usually not in a position of being a desperate seller, but they were at the time. And the way Buffett structured it is legendary. He did it as a convertible preferred stock, which is a fancy way of saying he lent them the money, and if they pay it back, they also owe him a whole bunch more money as compensation for the risk that he took. And he wound up getting his money back and still owned about $3 billion worth of Goldman Sachs shares. That's a great example of private lender investing. So what type of return are you looking for? This is not like the money in the bank. It's not like CDs and, oh yeah, I'm getting 2, 3, 5%. Forget that. This is only worth doing if you're going to have a significant return on the investment. The deals I see are 18% per annum, 20%, 25%. Somebody called me, a friend of mine, he said, I could probably make 6% if I lend them. Don't bother. The effort, the risk, it's not worth it. This is to make good money. It's just another way of becoming tethered to the business that you have expertise about, you have a passion about, you like the people, you don't want to own it, so you are lending to the business. And there has to be strings attached. It's not a handshake. And as I say here, if it doesn't feel right, run for the hills. This has to be based on mutual trust. That's why the chemistry is needed. And it is definitely an area that I do not recommend doing this yourself. So this is my second area, owning the business, private lender investing. And we go to number 3, sales and manufacturing partnerships. Now, this is the one I probably see the least of the 6 that we're talking about today. And just to give you a couple examples of what that would look like. An example would be, I'm a chef and I could come into the restaurant and I could be employed as a chef. Fine, I'll take on the responsibility. Or I could say to the owner of the restaurant, you know, I'll be here more than as a chef. I'll run your entire kitchen. So even when I'm not here working, I'll be responsible for what goes on. So now you're really a manufacturing partner because you're responsible for the backstage of that restaurant operation, which can lead to another example, which is if you then have 2, 3, 4 restaurants like that, now all of a sudden you have a business that you went from being a chef to being a restaurant entrepreneur. You have multiple establishments and you're not necessarily owning them, but you're running the kitchen because that's where your expertise is. And what creates the money is the business deal that you cut with the owner of that restaurant. That would be one example. On the sales side, where I have seen this happen is a person who's a salesperson knocking on the door. Hey, I could bring sales to your company. Are you looking to hire a salesperson? Okay, fine. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to look for the opportunity beyond the employment as a salesperson. An example, a company saying, well, we really don't have any sales on the West Coast. Would you like to be a West Coast sales rep? Okay, now that's employment. But let's take it further. What if you become the West Coast sales rep, but you also bring in other representatives and maybe you find some other goods or services to sell? Maybe there's a different way of delivering product because of the location. And all of a sudden that becomes a little bit of a different business than the one that employed you as a salesperson. The role, the responsibilities, the give and the get has changed. And that's another way of having a career opportunity beyond what would be a traditional employment relationship. The key is to really identify, are you on the cost side or the revenue side? It's really hard to do both. And there's lots of ways to structure these relationships. But going back to the key elements of a good transaction, there has to be chemistry and trust, understand the business, have some passion for it, and then make a good deal, meaning the right deal at the right time. Employment with equity kickers, usually where this comes up is in the high-tech world where companies are using stock options as currency to retain employees. That's not my sandbox. I know it, I've heard about it, but I'm more on the with established companies and not necessarily where options would be effective. So what does this mean? Excuse me. It means that you're bringing expertise, and beyond getting paid for the expertise, you're looking to have some upside potential. I could use the catchword skin in the game. That could be based on the company's overall profits. It could be based on the value of the company. It could be based on units sold. Years ago, a friend who he owned a dry cleaner, and he brought somebody in and he told the person, look, you're going to work here at the counter, blah, blah, blah. But he gave them an incentive for every for X number of orders that came in, and if they were shirts, it was one number. If it was pants, it was another. So this person now had more than a paycheck. They had also a vested interest in seeing an increase in revenue in that dry cleaning business. So the key is in all of these, and now we can get into all kinds of technical stuff, which goes really beyond today on how these deals are structured. I just wanted to flag the fact that the starting point is to understand the market value of the services that you're bringing to the table. And then the difference between what they'll pay you and what that value is and could be is where there's another component to this that, excuse me, would be contractual in nature. It would be in the employment contract. These are not done on handshakes. And there has to be a clear understanding going into it of what the goals are and how would people resolve problems and what if it doesn't work out. The more work that's done on the front end of the relationship to structure it so it's fair, the more likely it'll be that it'll be sustainable. And if things don't work out, it could be an amicable parting of the ways. The biggest mistake is people start these things without having a full understanding, and each person thinks it's a little different. And without having it properly lined up, there's a lot of risk that people get resentment or they're upset with things, and that's not a healthy situation. Any questions so far on the 4 items that we've covered?
No questions yet.
This one, strategic tenant relationships, is great because it's easy to get money, or easier to get money for real estate than it is for a business. And what's a strategic tenant relationship is basically somebody owns a building. It doesn't have to be you. Could be a friend, could be a family member. That's why this is a nice way to get money, because somebody could buy a building and they're going to get rents and there's going to be a return on investment. But if you could bring more to it by structuring a deal with tenants that there's additional rent if the tenant achieves certain results. This is done a lot with restaurants. A lot of restaurants are not necessarily just paying X dollars per square foot. There may be additional rent, which gives the landlord also an incentive to try to drive business to the location through signage and through things of that nature. There's different ways of structuring these relationships. I refer to as the give and the get scorecard. Both have to be understood, and there has to be a way to verify. Let's take the example of the restaurant. The results have to be something where the restaurant owner is willing to share that with the landlord. In my example, if they're not willing to, if they're unable to, it's not going to work. Then it's not the right structure for that type of relationship. This is probably the most. It's the most challenging to set up, because the tenant, the business, is inherently going to say, hey, I'm just leasing from you. Stop trying to take money out of my pocket. So it's not easy to get a tenant interested, but it definitely works, because then where the tenant says, well, I don't have quite all the security deposit, or I don't want this to be a 5-year lease, or I don't need all of this space. Those are the door opener negotiating points under the landlord-tenant paradigm that can be opening the door for introducing more of a strategic relationship beyond landlord-tenant. And now, the big one, at least what people say. Are there good opportunities to buy a business as part of a franchise system? What do you think? I totally understand it, yes. But, and here's the but, the franchise system, as just an opinion, going to a franchise does not work for anyone who has significant experience. The franchise systems are very good for beginners, maybe intermediate level, but there becomes a point in time where the cost and the controls imposed by the franchisor, and I don't care, what level, whether it's, no, I'm not going to name names. It doesn't matter. Well, the point is, if there's at some point the entrepreneur who's built the business within the franchise system, they're going to start thinking, I'm really not getting much from corporate. The name, the branding, yeah, that's great. But, these customers know me. They would come here regardless of whether the franchisor's name is on the door or not. And that's when resentment kicks in. And that's where I kick in, because people bring me in to negotiate how to get out of franchise relationships. So I have a jaded view. There's no doubt about it. But I have to bring it up because in a discussion about investing in privately held businesses, this is the one that gets the media attention. If you do Google searches, this comes up all the time, partially because the big franchise companies spend a lot of money to perpetuate this notion. I was going to say something more like scheme, but that's too harsh. To perpetuate the notion that that there's value in joining forces to be part of a system, and there is for companies that are very young, for people who have maybe a little bit less experience. But then eventually, like I say, the entrepreneur says, I really don't need this. I'm paying all this money to be a franchisee, and it's just not worth it. Help, get me out of this. So these are the 6 areas that I believe have the most opportunities to connect people with career aspirations with the needs and wants of privately owned and family companies. I'd like to take questions, and I also have a slide on things to avoid. So let me do the things to avoid. These are a mix and a match of things that have been said to me throughout the years. I don't know anything about the business, but I can get up to speed. No, that's not a place that might be good for a place you want to work as an employee. That's not a place you want to be where you're putting in your money. Don't put your money into something you don't understand. But it's such a good deal. If it doesn't have people you can trust and work with, if you don't understand the business, it doesn't matter if it's such a good deal. Problems will come up, and those problems will be impossible to solve based on personalities and resentment and things like that. Or they get resolved, but with tremendous emotional challenges along the way. There's slim pickings out there. I might not find anything better, maybe, but you don't want to be desperate and just do something because of the fear of being left out. My advisor tells me not to do anything where I don't own and control everything. That is old school, traditional. There's many different techniques that can be applied. So you don't have to necessarily be the owner of everything. You don't have to necessarily control everything. There's ways of structuring deals and relationships to protect yourself without having to necessarily own and control everything. I don't have enough money to consider other situations that may be better. This is where if you can't do it right, it may not be worth doing at all. Going cheap is not a good idea with this. I'm not saying you have to have the most money or invest the most or be super wealthy, but to try to use strategic transactions with, there is a direct correlation between having capital and having success in doing this. However, as I was saying earlier to Sarah, if someone says, I just don't have the money, I'm going to say, don't let that be your impediment, because there is more money out there than there are opportunities. If there is a good opportunity, if the business needs are clearly articulated, if it's understandable to an investor, there is money that can be obtained to provide the capital to the entrepreneur who's looking to make the investment. And lastly, a friend of a friend said, this is the way it's done. I love that one. A variation of that is, well, at the country club, I heard, okay, that's all great. And then just forget about that, because what worked in one case for someone doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same thing, unless it's comparable. And then you have to really understand what worked and what didn't. And that does have value if it is comparable. But just saying, hey, this is the way it's done, that's talk over, that's talk as opposed to something of substance to hang your hat on. I know I went quickly, maybe faster than I would normally like, but I wanted to cover enough. I have a philosophy that says the more you could put into the presentation, hopefully you're hitting on at least one or two things that people take away and find value in. This is playing the odds. The more I could throw out here, the better the chance of success that somebody finds at least one or two things of great value. Would be happy to hear questions.
Yeah, thank you, John. So there's one just kind of comment, and then I'll ask a question. So the comment was back to the franchise. So typical, Matt shared, typical franchise line lets you be in business for yourself, but not by yourself. Right. So I think that's kind of hitting on maybe a little bit about what you were sharing.
It's a true statement, and that's where there's great value for someone who otherwise would be an island. You don't want to be owning a business or investing in a business and you have no sense of context. So one thing that franchise systems do well, and some better than others, is they provide a sense of community. And in the community, they will share with you financial metrics to use, HR practices, equipment. So those things are tremendously valuable. Again, for people who have not been doing this for years and years and years, it's very valuable. For at some point in a development path, the franchisee, the owner, has a lot of those things themselves from their own experience or their own contacts, and their reliance on the franchise system becomes less over time. At least that's been my experience.
Given your experience, is there a, thinking about anybody who's watching this and joining today that is interested in kind of jumping into this world? Is there a typical background that serves them better or worse, right? Is there a typical degree or experience that sets someone up for success?
It's a good question. The type of backgrounds that probably lend itself best would be business related. So people that have a marketing background, have financial background. I would say those two in particular would be the most connected between, let's say, their career expertise and their academic expertise, and how to leverage that in the context of investing in a company that's privately held or family owned.
Okay. And then if someone is interested, it's kind of like on the very front lines of this, right? They're curious, they're here, but they're not really sure about the details about exactly what they want to do. What would be their next step? Is that what you would help with? How would they go from interested to, okay, now I know exactly what I want to do?
I think it would be a coaching type relationship initially of, have you thought of this? Have you looked at this part of it? And help someone to think it through, because it's hard to do yourself if you haven't done it before, and there's a lot at stake. So having somebody to bounce ideas off of, to give it some direction, I think would be an early next step relationship, whether it was me or someone else. But that's the type of relationship I would look for, is somebody who you could bounce ideas off of and get not just and get an objective, knowledgeable set of guidelines and expectations on what would be next, and help the person to figure out, does it make sense? What's the roadmap? How to implement this or not? And that's where the individualization and having it done in a private one-on-one setting beyond, let's say, a group webinar would be applicable.
Sure. Okay. And so we have a couple more questions. So the first one is, what are the resources for finding a family business that is looking for investment or new ownership?
The traditional path to finding businesses that are looking to be bought or receive capital are through business broker type channels. There's business brokers online. There are listings. BizBuySell is probably the largest website. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm not a big fan of any of that because the type of businesses that are typically, and I'm going to say there's exceptions, so the word typically is a little dangerous, But typically, those businesses that are going with a business broker are not necessarily, I got to be careful of my words. I don't want to say anything that's too negative, but those aren't necessarily the best places to find good businesses. The best place is through personal connections and word of mouth. Nothing is better than that. And it's not necessarily to say, hey, do you know somebody who's a business who's interested in blah, blah, blah. It's first to identify businesses that may have something piques your interest about their business as a business. They may have, the owner of that business might have no idea about wanting to do anything involving money or selling, but the starting point is the business itself, and if there could be some form of personal relationship, and from there it can easily go into any one of the 6 different options that I've outlined here today.
Okay, so there's not necessarily the follow-up question to that was, is there a specific marketplace and what is it called? So
there is a marketplace of small businesses that are listed by business brokers to be sold. That is an established marketplace. It's very broad. It's decentralized. It's got and it's accessed through the intermediaries, business brokers, and different websites. But I am expressing a little bit of a negative view, and I don't believe that that's the best way to find an opportunity. It is one of the ways. I'm not saying it's not usable, but it's limiting. It's very limiting. That's a better way to say it, because it's not like every business that is not. There's a broader range of businesses that would be a good candidate, but they have not taken the step of putting themselves on a business broker's website. That's a better way of expressing it. So you're tapping into businesses that aren't necessarily on a biz buy sell site. And if you could get to the owner because of a personal connection, because of a relationship, or just you knocked on the door and said the right words, that's a better path than trying to do it through something that's analogous to a real estate listing. It's much easier to buy real estate with a real estate listing than it is to buy a business with a business listing. It doesn't correlate nearly as well.
Got it. Okay.
And I think what you said too, a lot of those are distressed businesses. They'll always say they're selling because they're retiring.
Oh yeah.
From what I saw, but is that the truth?
No, it's code. It's code to say, I want out and I'd like to get out with as little harm to my personal finances as possible. And retirement is business owner code to say, I'd like to sell the business. They may not be even thinking about retirement, but that's a word that is accepted as a calling card. Keeping in mind, real estate, you could put a for sale sign outside. It's not going to change anything. People are still going to work at a business. They're still going to go to their apartment building. They're going to, your home is your home. But a for sale sign outside of a business is devastating. The employees are going to be concerned. What's going to come of us? Customers don't necessarily want to hear of it. Suppliers might get nervous about whether they're going to get paid or not. So the ability of an owner of a business to get the word out is much more limited than, let's say, the owner of a real estate investment. And therefore, they use words like retirement in their pitch to potential suitors, even if it's really not motivated by retirement.
That makes sense. Sorry, Matt also had a question about what about regional SBA offices? I think is a way to identify potential investment opportunities.
I don't know if they do have connections that they use to open doors, maybe, and that might be more on an individual basis. I'm not sure they have anything that's structurally in place through the SBA offices. Maybe. I don't know it as well, because I tend to be more on the back end of these situations. Example, we can't pay the loans back. Well, what happened? Where did you get how did you get into this? Well, I went to a business broker and they had me buy this business that I didn't know anything about. And I borrowed a bunch of money and now I can't pay it back. That's where I tend to get involved in situations where there's problems. So on the front end of it, of how the deal got structured and how they found each other, I'm not so sure if the SBA does or does not provide that service. I tend to think that they don't. I don't think that, except maybe just on a one-off basis, which would be based on who you know and the relationship that you could develop with the people that work there. I don't think structurally they do anything.
Okay. And then there was just one more clarifying question about the website. Is it called Biz Buy Sell?
Biz Buy Sell. I could send a link, but and there's probably like 2 or 3 others. Maybe as a follow-up, I'll be happy to send a link to each of those.
Okay. And then there was another question about, are you a good resource? Are you a good source for motivated business sellers?
Motivated, yes, because motivated means realistic, and I would be a good person to give direction on how best to go about it. Sometimes it can be done do it yourself by the owner. Sometimes it needs professional intervention from investment bankers or people that are doing that sort of work. And some of it I could help to do it as their advisor. I do mergers and acquisitions consulting as part of my portfolio of services. But having someone to give feedback on, how to go about it, what are your options, is a good starting point for a consultation. And they're going to get different opinions too. Typically, an owner goes to their accountant. They may have a lawyer that they speak with. They may have a friend who owned a business or owns a business. So there should be multiple input points for the owner, on the beginning of that journey. And one of the first questions that has to be asked is, what is your time frame? Motivated can sometimes mean motivated because there's very little time on the clock, meaning the company is running low on money and time. Or it might be something that is more based on personal needs, health issues, family issues. So you have to really understand what the time frame is. What is the realistic time frame that the owner is seeking to achieve a sale, and what are those objectives? And that discussion is critical to setting out the right game plan and putting in place the right process.
That's great. Okay, we have another question. So it says, you mentioned right deal, right time. What's your thoughts on headwinds in current economy related to timing or market regional areas to focus on in expectation of downturn in 2023? Well,
I know I've already seen some buyers for businesses pulling back a little bit because the interest rates have gone up, which means that to be competitive, the deal that they're looking to make a purchase, it's harder because now the interest that they're going to have to pay is more. So it puts more pressure on the target company's results to make sure that the deal can actually close and be financed. So I do think that there's a sensitivity based on just the overall macroeconomic conditions. But in a bad economy and one where the banks are contracting and there's less money available, I'll say this, those are the best opportunities, because in a down market, companies are going to grow. They grow by taking market share from the ones that can't continue or are unable to stay in business. And so in a down market, where my practice tends to go is acquirers, the businesses that are looking to grow by acquiring their competitors who are going out of business, or strategic deals with companies that in the past would have been unaffordable. Those are opportunities. So one person's problem becomes another person's opportunity. And I don't say that in a callous way. The right situations have win-win outcomes. I'm thinking of one in Kansas City a few years ago. The owner was 80 years old. what he wanted the most were to have his 30 employees. He wanted them to have jobs with the acquiring company. And that was really important to him. Yes, it was important the money he got out of it, but having 30 employees and having them taken care of was really his first objective. And by knowing that, you could filter out, what's going to be the right way to sell that business and to who and over what time frame. And so understanding the background, understanding the objectives, those are all part of the things that have to be in place before before any action is taken. And that's all done in the planning phase.
Okay. With that, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect more or have questions?
Well,
After today.
anytime, I'm always happy to talk with folks that are especially coming through the Tulane University channels. So I have, email is great, and I'm happy to pick up the phone. We could schedule a GoToMeeting. I prefer GoToMeeting over Zoom, but I could do Zoom or Teams. And that's usually the best way to start a relationship and see where it goes from there.
Okay. What's the best email that they can use? I think did you have a final slide with that info on it?
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Well, great. Okay. So all of your information is here. Garrett says, great insights. Thank you, John. I think the conversation today was really robust. The information was so helpful. Do you want to close us out with any final thoughts?
The only final thought I have is that opportunity doesn't necessarily come dressed up with the word opportunity. You have to look for it and think broadly. And I'm hoping that today's webinar helped a little bit to get people to think broader than the one channel of employment relationships. There's other ways of leveraging your expertise and building your career, and hopefully some of these insights may make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And everyone have a great day. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.